"Sir, I know how to make your daughter walk again," said the black beggar boy to a millionaire. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore, impossible to believe. Jackson Miles froze mid-step, his hand tightening instinctively around the handle of his daughter's wheelchair. He'd traversed this particular stretch of city sidewalk hundreds of times before, but never like this, never with the quiet protest of rubber wheels accompanying his Italian leather Oxfords, never with the weight of shattered dreams pressing down on his shoulders with each step forward. His 9-year-old daughter Lauren sat motionless in her wheelchair, a handmade quilt draped across her lifeless legs. Her chestnut hair fell forward, curtaining a face that had once been quick to smile. Jackson hadn't surrendered hope. But after 2 endless years, the word had become a barb that tore at his insides rather than a balm. Every specialist, every experimental treatment, every supposed miracle worker had delivered the same verdict while cashing his substantial checks: permanent spinal damage. "She'll adjust," they would say with practiced sympathy. "Many people lead full lives without the use of their legs. 2 more blocks and we're home," Jackson said, his voice straining for cheerfulness. Lauren didn't respond. She hadn't spoken more than a few sentences in days. As they turned the corner toward their brownstone, a voice called out from the shadows of an alley. "Sir." Jackson instinctively moved closer to Lauren's wheelchair, his muscles tensing. "In a city like this you learn to be cautious." He glanced toward the sound. A boy stepped forward. He couldn't have been older than 12, thin-framed and wearing clothes that had seen better days. But his eyes, they held something that made Jackson pause. A certainty, a calmness that seemed out of place. "Uncle," the boy said again, his voice steady, "I know how to make your daughter walk again." Jackson felt a flash of anger. Street scams were common enough, but this targeting a man with his disabled child, this was a new low. Jackson's laugh was cold. "Do you have any idea how many specialists I've taken her to? How many procedures she's endured? And you, a child from the streets, claim you can succeed where Johns Hopkins failed? Move along," Jackson said firmly. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling." The boy didn't budge. "I'm not selling anything, sir. My name is Aiden Beckett, and I can help her." Jackson tightened his grip on Lauren's wheelchair. "Do you have any idea how many doctors have told me they can help? How many treatments we've tried? How much money?" "It's not about money," Aiden interrupted. "Money can't fix everything." Something in the boy's tone, the complete absence of doubt, shocked Jackson to pause. And then he noticed something even more startling. Lauren, who had been gazing vacantly at nothing for so long, slowly lifted her head. The smallest spark of interest flickered in eyes that had been dull for months. "How?" Jackson demanded, his voice caught between dismissal and desperate hope. He should walk away, shield Lauren from yet another false promise. But he couldn't ignore that tiny flame of attention now burning in his daughter's expression. It had been weeks since anything had penetrated her isolation. "My grandmother," Aiden said, his gaze steady and unflinching. "She helped me when the doctors said nothing could be done, when everyone else had given up." He straightened his shoulders slightly. "She asks only for trust." Jackson felt a bitter laugh rise in his throat. Trust. As if he had any left to give after watching every medical promise dissolve into disappointment. After emptying bank accounts for treatments that led nowhere. After witnessing his daughter's vibrant spirit fade day by day, like a sunset being swallowed by darkness. "Please, Dad," Lauren whispered. Her voice was so soft that Jackson nearly missed it. "Can we go?" Jackson looked down at his daughter in shock. Those were the first words she had spoken voluntarily in days. He knelt beside her wheelchair. "Lauren, sweetheart, this isn't real. There's no magic cure out there. We've tried everything." "Not everything," Aiden said quietly. "Not my grandmother." Lauren reached out and touched her father's hand. "Please." That single word, barely above a whisper but filled with the faintest glimmer of hope, undid him completely. The sound of her voice, voluntarily offering a word he hadn't heard in days, pierced through his skepticism. What kind of father would he be to extinguish even the smallest spark in his child's eyes? What was left to lose when everything that mattered had already been taken? "Fine," Jackson said, straightening up. "But at the first sign of trouble we're leaving. Understand?" Lauren nodded. Aiden smiled, not the triumphant grin of a con artist who had hooked a mark, but the gentle smile of someone who had been expecting this moment. "Follow me," he said, and so they did. Through streets Jackson had never explored, despite living in the city for 15 years. Past storefronts with faded signs, around corners where the bustle of the city faded to a distant hum. Lauren's wheelchair bumped over uneven pavement, but she didn't complain. Her eyes were focused on Aiden's back as he led them forward. Jackson checked his watch nervously. They had been walking for nearly 30 minutes. The neighborhoods had grown progressively less familiar, the buildings more weathered, the streets narrower. His instincts screamed at him to turn back. "How much further?" he asked. "Almost there," Aiden replied without turning around. "My grandmother lives at the edge of the city, where it's quieter." They came to a stretch of land that seemed out of place in the urban landscape, a small wooded area between developments, the kind of forgotten space that somehow escaped the relentless march of construction. A narrow dirt path wound through the trees, barely visible unless you knew where to look. It disappeared into the shadows between ancient oaks that somehow survived the city's relentless expansion. "We can't take the wheelchair through there," Jackson protested, eyeing the uneven ground and exposed roots that would make the journey impossible on wheels. "I'll carry her," Aiden offered with unexpected confidence. Jackson shook his head immediately. "I'll do it." He leaned down and gathered Lauren into his arms, surprised again by how little she weighed. Too little. She felt like a bird in his hands, fragile and hollow-boned. She had lost so much weight since the accident, her appetite diminishing in perfect synchronization with her hope. The doctor had mentioned feeding tubes at their last appointment, another conversation Jackson had filed away in the growing folder of worst-case scenarios. Aiden nodded and started down the path. Jackson followed, cradling Lauren against his chest. The weight of her body against his brought back memories of carrying her as a toddler, of her laughter as he swung her through the air. When had he last heard that laugh? The path opened to a small clearing. In the center stood a modest cabin, its wooden walls weathered by time but sturdy. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and wildflowers grew in seemingly random patches around the porch. As they approached, the door opened. An elderly woman emerged, her silver hair braided and wrapped around her head like a crown. She wore a simple dress of deep blue, and her feet were bare despite the cool afternoon air. Her face was lined with wrinkles that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. "Ada," Aiden called out. "I brought them, just like you said I would." The woman, Ada, smiled. "Right on time." She looked directly at Lauren. "Hello, child. I've been waiting for you." Jackson tightened his hold on Lauren. "How did you know we were coming?" Ada's eyes met his, and Jackson was struck by their clarity, dark brown with flecks of amber, sharp and knowing. "The same way I know your daughter's spine isn't broken beyond repair," she said. "The same way I know you've stopped believing in things you can't measure." Jackson felt a chill run through him. "Who are you?" "Just an old woman who sees what others miss," Ada replied. She gestured toward the cabin. "Please come inside." Jackson hesitated, but Lauren stirred in his arms. "I want to go in, Dad." Reluctantly, he carried her up the porch steps and through the open door. The interior of the cabin was simple but warm. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across wooden floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with a subtle, earthy fragrance. Ada motioned toward a cushioned bench near the fire. "Place her there, please." Jackson gently set Lauren down. She winced slightly as he adjusted her legs, a reflex response, the doctors had said. The nerves still fired occasionally, creating phantom sensations, but no true feeling remained below her waist. Ada knelt in front of Lauren. "May I touch your legs, child?" Lauren nodded. Jackson stepped forward. "Wait, Dad," Lauren said, her voice quiet but firm. "Let her try." Ada placed her hands on Lauren's knees. Her eyes closed and she began to hum a melody that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. It wasn't a tune Jackson recognized, yet somehow it felt ancient and familiar at once. For several long moments, nothing happened. Jackson watched, his skepticism battling with the desperate, irrational hope that kept surging despite his best efforts to suppress it. The only sound was the crackling of the fire, and Ada's soft humming, a melody that seemed to sink into the wooden walls of the cabin and reverberate back with added richness. Then Lauren gasped. The sound was small but sharp, like a door opening suddenly in a silent room. Jackson's eyes snapped to his daughter's face. "I feel something," she whispered, her eyes widening with disbelief. "Dad, I feel something in my toes." Jackson moved to her side instantly, kneeling so quickly his knees struck the hard floor with painful force he barely registered. What do you feel?" "Like pins and needles. Like when your foot falls asleep and then wakes up." Tears welled in her eyes, turning them into reflecting pools of wonder. "I haven't felt anything for 2 years. Not a thing." Ada opened her eyes but kept her hands on Lauren's knees. "Your spine isn't dead," she said gently. "It's frozen, locked in grief, just like your heart." Jackson frowned. "That's not what the medical scans show. The damage is physical, not emotional. The body and spirit aren't separate things," Ada replied. "One reflects the other. Your daughter's body has held on to the trauma of that day, just as her heart has." She looked at Lauren. "Would you like to try standing?" Lauren's face paled. "I can't." "You couldn't before," Ada corrected. "Now you might." Aden stepped forward from where he had been quietly observing. "I couldn't walk right before I met Ada," he said. "My right foot was twisted from birth. The doctors said it would never be normal." He lifted his foot, rotating it in a circle. "But look at it now." Jackson studied the boy's foot. It looked perfectly normal. Ada rose to her feet with surprising grace for her age, her movements fluid as water finding its path. "Shall we try to stand now?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, like an impossibility suddenly within reach. Lauren looked at her father, fear and hope battling in her expression, the fear of disappointment that had become as familiar as breathing, and the dangerous, fragile hope that had been absent for so long. Jackson nodded wordlessly, his throat constricted too tightly for speech. Ada took Lauren's hands in hers, her weathered fingers wrapping gently around the girl's smaller ones. "We'll do this together," she said, her voice low and melodic. "Close your eyes for a moment. Focus on the feeling in your toes, let it travel upward. Remember what it was like to stand. Your body hasn't forgotten, even if your mind believes it has." Slowly, with Ada guiding her, Lauren began to shift her weight forward. Jackson hovered nearby, ready to catch her if she fell. For 2 years her legs had been like dead wood beneath her. There was no reason to think this time would be different. But then a miracle disguised as a simple movement. Lauren's right foot shifted. Just a twitch at first, barely perceptible, then a deliberate placement flat against the wooden floor. Her left foot followed with painstaking slowness. Her legs trembled violently with the effort, the muscles atrophied from disuse, no straining to remember their purpose. But they were responding. They were obeying commands. Her brain had been sending into silence for 2 years. "That's it," Ada murmured encouragingly, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. "Your body remembers everything it ever knew. Trust it, listen to what it's telling you now." Lauren gripped Ada's hands tightly, her face contorted with concentration. Inch by inch she pulled herself upright until she was standing, wobbly, unsteady, but standing. Jackson couldn't breathe, couldn't move. This couldn't be happening. And yet it was right before his eyes. "Dad," Lauren whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I'm standing." Something broke inside Jackson then, a dam he had built around his heart the day of the accident. He fell to his knees, sobbing, as Lauren took one shaky step toward him, then another. She managed 3 steps before her strength gave out. Jackson lunged forward with the quick reflexes of a father who had spent 2 years anticipating falls that never came, because his daughter couldn't stand to begin with. He caught her before she could crumple to the floor, sweeping her into his arms. He held her against his chest, his tears falling unchecked onto her hair, as sobs tore through his body, not the quiet, controlled grief he had permitted himself in hospital corridors, but raw, primal emotion that stripped away the veneer of the composed businessman he presented to the world. He asked, looking up at Ada through a veil of tears,
that transformed the cabin into a blur of warm light and shadow. Dar consulted specialists across 3 continents. We've tried therapies that aren't even approved in this country. How is this possible? Ada's smile held the gentle wisdom of ancient things, mountains, rivers, trees that had witnessed centuries pass. Healing happens in many ways, Mr. Miles.
Sometimes it needs medicine, sometimes surgery, sometimes the cutting edge of science. She placed a hand on Lauren's back, fingers splayed as if she could see through skin and bone to the injured spine beneath. And sometimes it needs belief, the kind that runs deeper than doubt, deeper than reason. Sometimes what's broken isn't what we think it is. Jackson turned to Aiden, who stood quietly by the door. And you? How did you know to bring us here? Aiden shifted his weight. I see things sometimes. People who need help. I saw you and your daughter walking past the alley every day. I saw how sad she was, how you both had stopped hoping. He glanced at Ada. After grandmother helped me, I promised I'd help others when I could. Grandmother? Jackson looked between Ada and Aiden. Ada nodded. Aiden came to me 6 years ago. His mother was at the end of her rope. A single parent with a disabled child. No money for specialized care. She left last year, Aiden said, his voice matter of fact. Said she needed to find herself. Ada's been taking care of me since. Jackson studied the boy anew. There was a wisdom in his eyes that belied his years. A quiet dignity in the way he carried himself, despite circumstances that would break many adults. Let me help you, Jackson said suddenly. Both of you. I can provide the best education for Aiden. A better place to live. Ada held up her hand, stopping him. We don't need your money, Mr. Miles. Then what can I do? Jackson asked. You've given me back my daughter. There must be something. Ada's eyes softened. If you truly want to help, then remember this moment. Remember that healing doesn't always come from where we expect it. And perhaps, in your work, you might remember that medicine isn't only about chemicals and surgeries. Lauren, still in her father's arms, looked at Aiden. Will I see you again? Aiden smiled. If you want to. Jackson reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He held it out to Aiden. My personal number is on the back. Call anytime, day or night. If you need anything, anything at all. Aiden hesitated, then took the card. He studied it for a moment before carefully tucking it into his jacket pocket. We should go, Ada said gently. Lauren needs rest. Her muscles have been dormant for a long time. They need to remember their purpose gradually. Jackson nodded. He helped Lauren back to the bench, while he went to retrieve the wheelchair from where they had left it at the edge of the woods. When he returned, Lauren was deep in conversation with Aiden, their heads bent close together, sharing secrets as children often do. The journey back was quieter, but charged with a different energy. Hope had replaced desperation. Lauren sat in her wheelchair, but now her toes wiggled occasionally beneath the blanket, small movements that represented an enormous change. Dad, Lauren said, as they neared their neighborhood. Yes, sweetheart, I think I want to go back to school next week. Jackson looked down at his daughter, at the color that had returned to her cheeks, the light that had rekindled in her eyes. If you're sure you're ready, Lauren nodded. I am. 1 week later, Lauren Harris walked through the doors of her school for the first time in 2 years. She moved slowly, leaning on a cane, but she walked. Her classmates, who had only known her in a wheelchair, stared in disbelief. Her teacher, Megan Roberts, burst into tears at the sight. When the local newspaper caught wind of the story, they called it a miracle. They asked Lauren what had happened, what treatment had finally worked after all others had failed. Lauren simply smiled and said, "A boy believed I could walk before I believed it myself." In a neighborhood across town, Aiden sat on the concrete steps of a modest apartment building, watching people hurry past. Ada had finally accepted some of the money Jackson had insisted on giving them, not as payment for Lauren's healing, but as an investment in Aiden's future, she had said. They had rented a small apartment on the 2nd floor. It wasn't much by the standards of Jackson Miles's world, but compared to where they had been, it was a palace, warm in winter, dry when it rained, with locks that worked and neighbors who sometimes smiled. Aiden observed the afternoon crowd with eyes that saw what others missed. A businessman walking with shoulders so tense they nearly touched his ears. A young mother counting change at a bus stop, worry lines etched around her mouth. And then, a girl about Aiden's age, limping heavily as she made her way down the sidewalk. Her face was a map of pain and isolation, the kind of expression that told of being different in a world that worshipped sameness. Aiden recognized it instantly. He'd worn it himself before Ada found him. He watched her for a moment, then stood up. Decision made. "Hey," he called out, his voice clear in the afternoon air. "I'm Aiden." The girl stopped, turning to him with suspicion hardening her features, the wariness of someone who had learned that attention often meant mockery. So, Aiden said, smiling gently, the same smile he had offered Lauren weeks ago. "My grandmother makes the best hot chocolate in the city. The secret is cinnamon, and something else she won't tell me. Would you like some?" The girl studied him, her eyes searching his face for signs of a trap, for the cruelty she had come to expect. Finding none, she hesitated, then nodded slightly, a barely perceptible movement that nonetheless represented a galaxy of trust. As they walked toward the apartment together, Aiden began to hum softly, the same ancient melody Ada had used with Lauren. The notes drifted up into the air, invisible threads weaving between them. A song of healing passed down through generations, connecting those who needed hope with those who could provide it. Because sometimes the most profound healing begins not with medicine or technology or wealth, but with a simple act of recognition. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more emotional, dramatic, and unexpected tales. And let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. We love hearing from all of you. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep watching.